In the final year of World War II, as American bombers carved firepaths across Germany and Allied armies closed in from every direction, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Pilots reported seeing shapes rise from the clouds, sleek, silver aircraft unlike anything they had ever encountered. They moved faster than any fighter in the sky. They climbed vertically. They struck without warning. These were Germany's jet interceptors, powered by engines the Allies barely understood for a moment. The balance of air power, the very foundation of Allied strategy, seemed to tremble. If Germany could field these machines in large numbers, the bombing campaign that strangled its war industry might collapse. Victory itself could slip from reach. But the Allies noticed something else, hidden within the chaos of the German retreat. Scattered rumors of facilities deep in Bavaria and Saxony where the engines were built. Laboratories cut into hillsides, test stands beside frozen rivers, blueprints locked away in vaults, and engineers who held knowledge the world had never seen before. Washington and London realized that capturing this technology was no longer a matter of curiosity. It was a race against the SS, who had orders to destroy everything before it fell into enemy hands. A race against the Soviets, whose armored spearheads were reaching the same regions from the east, and a race against time, as Germany spiraled toward collapse and chaos made information harder to find. So a new kind of unit moved to the front. Not infantry, not tank crews, but scientists, engineers, intelligence officers, and commandos working as one. Small teams attached to fast-moving divisions, slipping behind retreating German lines to seize factories, interrogate engineers, and secure crates of documents before gunfire or flames erased the evidence forever. They were told only one thing: get the jet engine secrets before anyone else does. Their path would take them through bombed-out cities, abandoned laboratories, underground tunnels, and workshops still warm from machines shut down minutes earlier. Every stop brought new discoveries and new dangers. German forces were still fighting. SS squads were burning files. Soviet units were closing in. What unfolded became one of the quietest yet most consequential missions of the entire war, a mission that shaped the jet age, the Cold War, and the future of aviation itself. Because before the war ended, American commandos would stand inside the heart of Hitler's technology empire and carry its most guarded secrets out under their arms. In the late 1932, long before the world realized how deeply war would reshape technology, Germany's engineers were already reaching toward the future. The Treaty of Versailles had crippled the nation's aviation industry after World War I. Throughout the decade, laboratories in Berlin, Munich, and Rostock filled with young engineers who believed flight could be revolutionized by one idea: a machine powered not by a piston engine, but by a continuous jet of exhaust. German scientists such as Hans von Ohain and the engineers of Heinkel were among the first to build working turbojet engines. Their early prototypes were fragile, short-lived, and unstable, but they represented a leap forward engines that could, in theory, propel an aircraft faster than anything built before. As the Nazi regime rearmed, these projects suddenly received new funding, new facilities, and direct interest from military planners who understood what speed could mean for air combat. By the early 1942s, Germany had something no other nation possessed: not just experimental jet engines, but the beginnings of a jet-powered air force. At the Heinkel works in Rostock, the He-280 prototype completed test flights that stunned observers. At Dessau, Junkers' Jumo 004 engine reached operational performance levels. And at BMW facilities near Munich, the BMW 003 engine began to show promise for mass production. These breakthroughs happened quietly. For months, Allied intelligence had little understanding of what Germany was building or how advanced these projects had become. But pilots flying over Europe began reporting flashes of silver and trails of heat that defied standard aircraft behavior. Something was emerging in German skies, something new, something fast. Then, in early 1944, Allied reconnaissance photographs confirmed what rumors suggested. Germany was preparing to deploy jet fighters. Factories linked to the Messerschmitt company showed unusual aircraft frames. Runways near Augsburg and Lechfeld displayed scorch marks from high-temperature exhaust, and the remains of a downed aircraft revealed engine components unlike any Allied design. The implications were severe. For 2 years, Allied air strategy had relied on long-range bombers to wear down Germany's industry. The success of this strategy depended on fighter escorts and on the limitations of German interceptors. If Germany produced jet fighters in large numbers, the balance of power in the air could shift abruptly. Bombers that once crossed Europe in tight formations might be torn apart. Escort fighters might prove too slow to protect them. The war, already prolonged by resistance and setbacks, could gain new momentum in Germany's favor. But Germany faced its own challenge. Jet engines required specialized metals and exacting production standards. Their turbines endured extreme heat and rotational stress. Their compressors needed precision machining. The fuels required for efficient operation were scarce, and the complex engines demanded experienced workers, something the Third Reich was rapidly losing as the war dragged on. Even so, by mid-1944, Germany had managed to field operational jet fighters. The Me-262, powered by the Jumo 004 engine, made its presence known in dramatic fashion. Allied bomber crews reported being attacked by aircraft so fast their gunners could barely track them. Losses mounted. Fighter escorts struggled to intercept the new threat. For a moment, the possibility of a German resurgence hung in the air. Allied leaders responded quickly. Reports from pilots and intelligence analysts were clear. Understanding these engines was essential. Not just the airframes, the engines themselves. They needed to know how Germany had solved its engineering challenges, what materials it used, and what production methods allowed these machines to operate at such speed. This demand for knowledge coincided with another reality. By late 1944, Germany was retreating on every front. Cities fell, supply lines faltered, and factories began to evacuate or conceal their equipment. Engineers fled deeper into Bavaria and Saxony. Many facilities were moved underground to protect them from air attacks. And as the Allies tightened their grip, the Nazi leadership began preparing orders to destroy these sites rather than allow them to fall into enemy hands. But destruction required time, and time was one resource Germany no longer possessed. Allied planners realized there was a narrow window in which the most valuable technological intelligence of the war could be captured intact. Blueprints, prototype engines, metallurgy samples, test records, even the engineers themselves. But these materials were deep inside, collapsing territory, close to front lines shifting by the day. Reaching them required speed, accuracy, and a type of soldier who could operate where ordinary units could not. So, the Allies created new scientific intelligence teams. Units composed of scientists, engineers, interpreters, OSS operatives, and special detachments trained to move with armored divisions or ahead of them. Their mission was simple but urgent: identify, secure, and extract the technologies that could define the future. Among these teams, one mission stood out above the rest, a mission that would send American commandos into the heart of Germany's industrial centers to seize the secrets of the jet age before the Soviets arrived or the SS destroyed them. And as the winter of 1944 gave way to the early months of 1945, the stage was set for a technological chase across a collapsing empire. As Allied armies pushed deeper into German territory in early 1945, intelligence reports grew more specific, more urgent, and more alarming. Cities once thought to be conventional industrial hubs were now revealed as centers of advanced research. Underground complexes, hastily carved into mountains, held workshops shielded from bombing. Rail shipments intercepted by resistance networks included crates labeled with numerical codes linked to engine prototypes. Engineers captured at the front-mentioned facilities the Allies had never heard of places hidden beneath forests, disguised as civilian plants, or embedded in tunnel networks expanded by forced labor. One of the most significant discoveries came from the air itself. In late 1944 and early 1945, reconnaissance photographs of Bavaria and Saxony revealed unusual structures. Test stands with scorched concrete, ventilation shafts protruding from hillsides, rail lines ending abruptly at fortified bunkers. Analysts recognized the signatures of jet engine development, the elongated burn marks, the heavy exhaust channels, the reinforced blast walls. These images confirmed something long suspected, but never proven. Germany had dispersed its jet engine program into a network of hardened sites designed to survive bombardment. Dessau, home of Junkers, became a primary focus. So did Munich and Augsburg, linked to BMW's engine development. Rostock, despite repeated bombing, continued limited Heinkel operations. Allied scientists studying captured fragments realized that Germany was not just producing jets, it was experimenting with variations, refining turbine alloys, improving compressors, and testing new fuel systems. Even with shortages and chaos, the momentum of German engineering had not completely stopped. But Germany's internal collapse was accelerating. Allied breakthroughs across the Western Front pushed combat ever closer to these hidden complexes. The Ardennes counteroffensive had failed, the Rhine defenses were crumbling. Cities that once supported the aviation industry were being isolated or encircled. In the east, Soviet armies swept through Silesia and towards central Germany, taking with them any factories or engineers they could seize. This dual advance triggered a frantic response within the German hierarchy. Hitler's scorched earth policy, the so-called Nero Decree, ordered the destruction of all infrastructure that might aid the enemy. Local commanders received instructions to burn documents, demolish test facilities, and evacuate scientifically valuable personnel. The SS was given authority to oversee compliance, and in some regions, documents were set on fire, even as Allied artillery could be heard in the distance. But not everyone obeyed. Some engineers, recognizing the war was lost, protected their work in hopes it might secure favorable treatment from whichever power reached them first. Others simply fled, leaving entire laboratories intact. In several locations, confusion and contradictory orders left critical materials untouched for days. This unpredictability made the situation even more volatile. A facility might be abandoned intact one morning and destroyed by evening. The Allies had to strike quickly, before chance or sabotage erased what they needed. To coordinate this rapidly evolving mission, the United States expanded the ALSO's task force. Originally created to investigate Germany's nuclear program, ALSOs evolved into a broader scientific intelligence unit with authority to accompany frontline troops, interrogate enemy personnel, and seize research sites immediately upon capture. The OSS contributed operatives with experience in infiltration, interrogation, and rapid documentation. Engineers from the Army Air Forces joined as technical specialists. These mixed teams moved alongside armored divisions, often riding in jeeps behind tank columns or advancing hours ahead of infantry formations. Their instructions were precise. Reach the industrial centers before they were destroyed or overrun by Soviet forces. Secure engines, drawings, tools, and experimental components. Identify key scientists and protect them from SS units or chaotic reprisals. Prevent technology from disappearing into tunnels, mines, or river barges. And above all, gather enough technical intelligence to ensure that the Allied jet programs could advance rapidly after the war. Every day mattered. As Allied forces crossed the Rhine and fanned out across Germany, the intelligence race intensified. Reports from resistance networks indicated that the Soviets were also searching for jet-related facilities. Stalin's engineers wanted the WWII just as urgently as the Americans. A captured pilot revealed that Soviet intelligence officers had already approached German scientists in Silesia, and reconnaissance photographs showed Red Army movements toward Dessau and Leipzig, critical centers of aircraft production. This pressure shaped the American approach. They could not advance cautiously. They needed speed, surprise, and the ability to improvise. Armored divisions would breach a defensive line in the morning, and by afternoon an OSS ALSO's team would be inside a factory office, sorting through documents still scattered across desks. Engineers who surrendered often did so with little resistance, sensing that their knowledge might be their only protection. Others were found hiding in basements, caught between the fear of SS reprisals and uncertainty about their fate under Allied custody. As the final months of the war unfolded, one truth became clear. The fight for Germany's jet engine secrets was not merely a footnote to the conflict. It was a defining element of the technological struggle that would shape the world after 1945. The United States recognized the stakes. So did the Soviet Union. And even within Germany, scientists understood they had become pieces in a larger geopolitical game. The American commandos and scientific teams were now moving into position. Ahead lay a landscape of destroyed cities, abandoned factories, fortified tunnels, and laboratories frozen in time. Somewhere inside this collapsing territory were the engines, blueprints, and mines that had powered the Me-262, the aircraft that had stunned Allied pilots and hinted at the next age of aviation. Now the mission shifted from identifying targets to seizing them before everything collapsed around them. The mission to seize Germany's jet engine technology was unlike anything the United States had undertaken before. It required a kind of soldier who did not fit the traditional mold men who carried rifles, but also notebooks. Men who could storm a factory yet recognize the value of a turbine blade at a glance. Men who understood that the future of warfare might depend on a single blueprint rescued from a fire. For many of them, this mission was deeply personal. Some were scientists who had left universities to join the war effort, trading lecture halls for armored columns. Others had worked in aviation manufacturing before the conflict, their hands familiar with the weight of aluminum skins and the sharp scent of machine oil. These men knew that what Germany had accomplished, creating an operational jet fighter years ahead of the Allies, could not be dismissed as merely another weapon. It represented a leap in thinking, a door opening into a new era of flight, and if the Allies did not step through it, someone else would. As these teams advanced through Germany, they witnessed the human cost of technological ambition. The jet program had not been built on innovation alone. It had relied on forced labor, dispersed factories, and the relentless pressure of a regime obsessed with weapons of retaliation. Many sites were staffed by exhausted workers living in brutal conditions, their labor powering the machines that now lay silent under layers of dust and soot. Engineers who had spent years designing engines in protected offices now watched as their life's work became the object of a desperate international race. From the German perspective, the jet program had become a testament to both ingenuity and chaos. Early disagreements between Heinkel and Messerschmitt, between military planners and industrial leaders, delayed the deployment of the Me-262. Hitler's insistence that the aircraft be configured as a fighter bomber slowed its introduction at a critical moment. Shortages of high-temperature alloys forced engineers to improvise with materials that reduced engine lifespan. The WWII could barely survive hours of flight without needing replacement. Yet despite these challenges, Germany had achieved something remarkable, a weapon so advanced that it reshaped Allied strategy in a matter of months. To understand how this breakthrough had been possible, The American teams needed more than schematics. They needed insight, technical, tactical, and psychological. They sought to understand not only the engines themselves, but the thinking behind them. Why had Germany pursued jet development so early? How had they managed to build functional turbines under the constraints of war? What metallurgical techniques allowed their blades to withstand such extreme conditions? And what long-term designs were in progress when the war interrupted the program? Every captured facility offered pieces of the puzzle. In bombed-out workshops, the teams found engine casings still warm from recent tests. In underground tunnels, they discovered rows of half-assembled turbine components. In abandoned laboratories, they found notebooks filled with handwritten calculations that revealed the frustrations and breakthroughs of engineers working under relentless pressure. Each discovery deepened their understanding not just of German engineering, but of the intricate interplay between science and warfare. The tactical dimension of the mission was equally complex. Many sites were located near front lines or within areas where pockets of resistance still fought. Commandos had to move quickly, secure perimeters, and ensure that sensitive materials were not destroyed in the final hours of German occupation. Explosives planted by retreating SS units posed a constant threat. Some facilities had charges wired to main structures. Others had documents piled and drenched with fuel, awaiting the spark of a match. The Americans arrived in many places just in time, sometimes minutes before destruction. In one factory, steam still hung in the air from a boiler recently shut down. In another, conveyor belts were frozen mid-motion, suggesting a sudden evacuation. Tools lay scattered across workbenches. Drawings were pinned to boards. Calipers, gauges, and micrometers sat beside engines that would soon be crated and shipped across the Atlantic. These scenes became common for the team's snapshots of a technological enterprise abandoned in haste, preserved by the chaos of the war's final weeks. Then there was the enemy's growing sense of desperation. The Luftwaffe, once feared, had been reduced to scattered units attempting to defend what remained of the Reich. Jet pilots who had once launched with confidence from airfields near Augsburg and Munich now found themselves flying from improvised strips, short on fuel, short on spare parts, and overwhelmed by Allied air superiority. The arrival of American forces in regions critical to jet development only heightened the urgency. German engineers understood that their work held value not just to the Reich, but to whichever power captured it. Yet they also knew that the SS was prepared to prevent these secrets from falling into enemy hands at any cost. Into this volatile environment stepped the American scientific intelligence teams. Their task required judgment under pressure. They had to distinguish between facilities worth securing and those already stripped or irrelevant. They had to decide which engineers were essential and which were peripheral. They had to balance speed with caution, knowing that every hour increased the risk of destruction or Soviet arrival. And they had to do all of this while navigating ruins, resisting fire, and moving through areas where the front could shift without warning. But the closer they came to Bavaria and Saxony, the more the pieces began to align. Documents seized in one region corresponded to engine components found in another. Test reports from Rostock matched design changes observed in Augsburg. Intelligence intercepts revealed evacuation orders to Dessau. What began as scattered fragments slowly formed a clearer picture. The heart of Germany's jet program lay ahead, concentrated in a narrow corridor, soon to be overrun from both west and east. And as the Americans prepared for the final push into this corridor, they understood that the most critical discoveries had yet to be made. As the American teams pushed deeper into Germany, their work increasingly depended on intelligence gathered from scattered conversations, captured documents, and the occasional revelation from a German technician who understood that cooperation could mean survival. But raw information alone was not enough. The mission required interpretation, identifying patterns, connecting clues, and determining which sites were crucial and which were decoys or already stripped of value. This analytical angle became one of the operation's most decisive elements. The intelligence officers working alongside the commandos built a composite map of Germany's jet program. They traced supply chains, comparing destroyed shipments with newly discovered crates. They studied engine serial numbers, matching them to production plants and test facilities. They examined fuel mixtures found in canisters, using them to determine which engines were undergoing final trials. Through this mosaic of details, they began predicting where the Reich's most valuable research would be found. Such deductions often determined the direction of entire divisions. If an OSS analyst concluded that an underground tunnel system held prototype engines, armored units diverted to secure the site. If a German engineer hinted that blueprints had been shipped to a railway station before evacuation, reconnaissance aircraft flew immediate cover. Every new discovery reshaped the mission, and every hour mattered. But intelligence did not operate in a vacuum. The Soviets were advancing as well, and the Americans knew that the jet engines were not the only prize on the battlefield. If the Red Army captured the Junkers plants or the BMW works first, they would seize not only the technology but the scientists behind it. Both sides understood that post-war air power and national prestige would be built on the foundations laid in these final months. This competition created moral dilemmas for the American teams. They encountered engineers who were terrified of the SS but equally afraid of falling into Soviet hands. Some offered their knowledge freely, seeing the Americans as their best chance at safety. Others resisted, hoping to wait for surrender to the Western Allies on their own terms. The intelligence officers had to navigate these motives carefully, distinguishing truth from manipulation while still gathering the information needed to move forward. There was also the moral weight of what they found in places like Nordhausen. Beneath the mountains, where engines and aircraft components were machined by forced labor, the scenes were devastating. Prisoners who had endured unimaginable conditions staggered through tunnels littered with parts of the V2 and other weapons. The same facilities that produced marvels of engineering had consumed thousands of lives. This reality stayed with the teams, reminding them that technological brilliance often came intertwined with human suffering. The leadership dimension of the mission added yet another layer. Figures like General Leslie Groves, already overseeing the Manhattan Project, understood the strategic importance of capturing advanced German research. Colonel Boris Pasch directed several key operations, always pressing for rapid movement and taking calculated risks to secure scientific targets. These leaders pushed the teams forward, ensuring they remained close behind frontline units, and sometimes even ahead of them. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe leadership was disintegrating. Goering's promises of miracle weapons rang hollow as factories lay in ruins, fuel depots stood empty, and pilots struggled to keep their aircraft in the air. Engineers who had once presented their work in comfortable offices were now hiding in abandoned train stations, sleeping in barns, or waiting in basements for whichever army reached them first. Many carried briefcases filled with documents, the remnants of careers they hoped would protect them from retribution. Yet even in collapse, the German jet program demonstrated remarkable sophistication. The Jumo 004 engine, though limited by materials shortages, represented an engineering achievement far ahead of anything the Allies had built at that point. The BMW 003, despite its reliability issues, showed a bold experimental approach. The Heinkel prototypes, though overshadowed by Messerschmitt, offered unique design philosophies that the Allies were eager to examine. Every component the Americans seized, every turbine blade, compressor stage, fuel pump, or alloy sample told a story. The metallurgy revealed what Germany could produce under ideal conditions and how wartime scarcity forced them to cut corners. The test reports detailed problems with engine surges, blade failures, and heat-resistant coatings. These insights were invaluable. They allowed Allied engineers to avoid the same mistakes, accelerate their own programs, and understand the limits of jet propulsion. The intelligence teams also uncovered future plans. Blueprints showed projected models of advanced jets far beyond the Me-262, supersonic concepts, swept-wing designs, multi-engine bombers intended to challenge Allied air superiority. Some of these ideas remained mere sketches, others existed as partial prototypes. But together they demonstrated that Germany's aviation industry had anticipated a long war, a war in which technology might turn the tide. Now those ambitions lay scattered across a dying nation. The final angle, perhaps the most decisive, was the political one. The Americans understood that capturing this technology would shape not only the immediate war effort, but also the balance of power in the post-war world. Whoever controlled the engines, the scientists, and the research would shape the future of aviation, missile technology, and military strategy. The United States was determined not to let these secrets slip away. With the analysis complete, with the intelligence assembled, and with the front line advancing rapidly, the commandos now moved toward the most critical phase of the mission. The targets had been identified. The locations were clear. The window was shrinking. Ahead lay Augsburg, Oberammergau, Munich, Nordhausen, and finally Dessau, the heart of the German jet engine empire. And the Americans would have to reach them before everything inside was wiped away forever. The final phase of the mission began as American armored columns broke deep into southern Germany. Entire divisions were advancing faster than planners had predicted, overrunning positions that had resisted for months. Towns fell in rapid succession, and with each breakthrough, the OSS Also's teams surged forward behind the tanks, racing to reach the jet engine facilities before destruction crews or Soviet forces could intervene. Augsburg was the first major target. The Messerschmitt plant there had produced components for the Me-262, and intelligence analysts believed that blueprints related to the aircraft's structure and its engine installations might still be hidden inside the complex. As American forces approached the city, retreating German units attempted to destroy bridges, block roads, and set fire to storage depots. But the speed of the advance caught them unprepared. By the time infantry units entered the outskirts, smoke was rising from several buildings, yet the main engineering workshops remained intact. OSS teams moved in within hours. The smell of burning fuel still lingered in the air. Glass crunched beneath their boots as they passed shattered windows. Inside one building, workbenches were covered with tools abandoned in a hurry. Rolled drawings lay on the floor. Filing cabinets had been pulled open, but many documents were left behind, too many for a rushed evacuation. The commandos sorted through stacks of blueprints, identifying those related to engine mounts, fuel lines, and airframe stress points. Although the plant focused on aircraft structure rather than engine development, the information gathered helped clarify how the Jumo 004 had been integrated into the Me-262 design. But the mission's focus lay elsewhere. Augsburg was only a waypoint. Farther south, in the mountain town of Oberammergau, intelligence pointed to a facility used for advanced test equipment, turbine machining, and precision instrumentation. The region's rugged terrain had allowed the Germans to conceal workshops in valleys and forested slopes. As U.S. troops approached, explosions echoed across the hills. German forces attempting to destroy evidence. But once again, the advance proved too rapid. When American commandos entered one of the workshops, they found machines still warm, metal shavings on the floor, and gauges arranged neatly beside half-finished compressor blades. In a locked storeroom, they discovered specialized tools used to shape high-stress turbine components. Tools essential for understanding the precise tolerances of German jet engines. Even this discovery, remarkable as it was, represented just a fragment of the greater puzzle. The concentration of facilities in Bavaria made it clear that the jet program had been more dispersed and more resilient than expected. Each site seemed to hold a different piece of the German technological apparatus. Machining methods in one area, material samples in another, fuel systems elsewhere. As these pieces accumulated, the Americans saw patterns forming. The sophistication of the Jumo 004 did not rest in a single breakthrough. It emerged from dozens of interconnected developments scattered across the Reich. Then came the discovery that pushed the mission into its decisive phase. From interrogations conducted near Munich, American intelligence learned that critical documents and possibly prototype engines had been transported north towards Saxony as the front collapsed. Technicians who had traveled with the convoys reported seeing crates loaded into trains bound for Dessau, headquarters of the Junkers Company and home of the primary jet engine testing complex. If true, Dessau represented the heart of the German jet engine program. The Jumo 004 had been designed there, tested there, refined there. The engineers who solved the turbine endurance problems worked there, and the documentation that explained their successes likely remained on site, but time was running out. Soviet forces advancing from the east were nearing the Elbe River, rapidly approaching the same region. Junkers engineers were fleeing. SS officers were executing destruction orders. Some factories were already burning. A race that had been theoretical for months was now brutally real. To reach Dessau, the American teams needed to coordinate with 9th Army units pushing north. The roads were not safe. German troops retreating from the southern front still occupied villages, forests, and ridgelines. Bridges had been blown. Mines covered the shoulders of highways. Artillery occasionally struck intersections as American columns passed, but the urgency of the mission overrode hesitation. Commanders allocated armored escorts to ensure the scientific teams could move rapidly and safely. As they traveled through regions newly captured by US forces, they saw the disintegration of the German command system firsthand. Railway cars filled with equipment were abandoned in open fields. Truck convoys lay wrecked on roadsides. Underground tunnels used for aircraft production stood empty, with power still running to some machines. Everywhere, the collapse felt total, yet within this collapse lay precisely what the Americans were searching for. Approaching Dessau, they encountered increasing signs of coordinated evacuation. Fires burned in warehouses. Crates had been opened and scattered. Tracks showed where cargo had been dragged toward waiting vehicles. On the outskirts of the city, they found a temporary camp of engineers who had fled the Junkers works days earlier, carrying only personal belongings. Their accounts confirmed what intelligence had suggested. A significant portion of the engine documentation was still inside the main facility, along with prototypes and testing apparatus. The Americans pressed forward, weaving between smoldering buildings and partially destroyed workshops. They knew the Soviets were only hours behind them. They knew SS demolition crews might already be planting charges. They knew that what they found or failed to find would shape the future of Allied aviation. Ahead lay the final obstacle, securing the heart of Germany's jet engine program before the window closed forever. The drive into Dessau unfolded not as a single decisive battle, but as a race through the remains of a collapsing empire. Columns of American armor pushed toward the city, their progress slowed only by the last scattered pockets of German resistance. Smoke drifted across the roads from burning warehouses. The sound of distant explosions rolled across the plains, sounds that could mean fighting, demolition charges, or desperate attempts to erase evidence. Every mile mattered. Every delay carried the possibility that crucial documents would be lost forever. When the lead elements of the American advance reached the outskirts of Dessau, they found the industrial zone already partially abandoned. The Junkers complex, stretching across vast grounds of test stands, assembly halls, and research buildings, lay quiet, except for the faint crackle of fires in damaged sections. Windows were shattered. Doors hung from their hinges. But the scale of the facility was unmistakable. This had been the center of the Jumo 004 program, the engine that had powered Germany into the jet age. OSS and ALSO's teams dismounted, spreading through the grounds with urgency. Their first task was to secure the area before demolition crews could act. Armed commandos swept through hallways, basements, and storage rooms. They found blasting caps and explosives piled in corners, but no German teams in position to use them. The speed of the American advance had caught the SS off guard. The destruction orders had not been fully executed. What might have been reduced to rubble still stood, waiting to be discovered. Inside one of the test buildings, the teams encountered their first major find. Rows of Jumo 004 engines, some fully assembled and others in stages of disassembly, lined the floor. Work tables held turbine blades, compressor segments, and fuel regulators. Chalk markings on the floor indicated the workflow of test procedures. On a set of shelves, engineers had left handwritten notes, performance curves, lubrication requirements, temperature tolerances. Every scrap was valuable, every number told a story. The Americans began photographing, cataloging, and packing the materials with methodical precision. In the next building, they found engine components arranged for endurance testing. Bronze-colored turbine wheels lay beside failed blade samples used to evaluate metal fatigue. Charts on the walls showed results of stress analysis experiments. These details revealed the methods Junkers engineers had used to balance performance with the limitations of wartime alloys. For Allied scientists who would later study the materials, this information would prove critical not because it showed perfection, but because it illustrated how German engineers had managed to make the first jet engine work despite shortages, constraints, and failures. But the most important discoveries were still ahead. In a reinforced vault beneath one of the research halls, the Americans uncovered what the mission had been seeking for months: stacks of primary engineering documents. Blueprints detailing the internal geometry of the Jumo 004, production records from engine assembly lines, metallurgical studies comparing various alloys, fuel mixture tables, test results from flight trials conducted in 1944, even correspondence between engineers discussing problems with compressor surges and proposed solutions. Some papers had been hurriedly stuffed into crates as if someone had intended to remove them but had fled when the front collapsed. Others were still in filing cabinets untouched. The volume of information was staggering. The teams worked for hours, sorting and packing documents, ensuring nothing was overlooked. They knew that much of the future of jet propulsion, American, British, and Soviet, would draw from the facts contained in these papers. Outside, the city shook with the sounds of war approaching from the east. The Soviets were closing in. Their artillery could be heard faintly, the rhythmic boom carrying across miles of countryside. The Americans could not remain in Dessau long. What they took had to be moved quickly, secured with the same urgency that had brought them here. As they continued to sweep the grounds, they found several German engineers hiding in a basement beneath a laboratory building. Exhausted, still wearing the coats they had fled in, they emerged without resistance. These were not fanatics. They carried no weapons. Their briefcases were filled not with personal belongings, but with notebooks, diagrams, and technical drafts material they hoped would protect them in the uncertain hours ahead. Their capture provided not only documents, but the living knowledge that would help interpret everything found in the factories and test stands. With the key materials secured, the teams turned their attention to evacuation. Trucks rolled into the complex, their engines idling as crates were loaded under the watch of armed escorts. Aircraft components, engine prototypes, precision machining tools, and boxes of documents were hauled out of the buildings and onto transport vehicles bound for Allied-controlled staging areas. The work took place under constant pressure. At any moment, artillery from the advancing Soviet forces could strike the area. Any delay might force the Americans to abandon the site or share it with the Red Army. The final moments in Dessau carried a sense of both triumph and tension. The Americans had achieved what they had set out to do: seize the heart of Hitler's jet engine program before it could be destroyed or captured by another power. Yet behind them they left a city in ruins, factories silent, and a Germany whose technological brilliance could no longer alter the course of the war. As the last convoy rolled out of the Junkers complex, smoke drifted across the road. The sun hung low in the afternoon sky, casting long shadows over the industrial landscape. In the distance, faint echoes of artillery reminded everyone that they had arrived just in time. Hours later, Soviet forces would reach the same site, but the prize they sought was already gone, wrapped in canvas, loaded onto trucks, and headed west under heavy guard. The convoys carried more than machinery. They carried the knowledge that would power the next generation of aircraft. They carried the insights that would fuel decades of innovation. And they carried the understanding that warfare had entered a new age, one shaped not only by armies and navies, but by the mastery of science and engineering. The war was entering its final months, but the consequences of the mission were only beginning to unfold. When the convoys carrying Germany's jet engine secrets crossed into secure American-held territory, the scope of what had been captured began to reveal itself. Engineers accompanying the mission unpacked crates filled with turbine assemblies, compressor stages, alloy samples, and complete Jumo 004 engines, still marked with factory test stamps. Photographs taken of the Dessau complex showed the condition of the facilities at the moment of capture: intact test stands, preserved workrooms, and shelves lined with technical records untouched by flame or sabotage. For the Allied scientific community, this trove of material was unprecedented. Up to that point, American and British jet programs had been limited by a mixture of theoretical understanding and early experimentation. The British had operational jets in the Gloucester Meteor, and the Americans were testing the P-80, yet both nations were still refining their approaches to materials, blade durability, and compressor efficiency. The arrival of the German designs provided a detailed roadmap of decisions made under the pressures of wartime necessity. The first teams to examine the engines were struck by the simplicity and elegance of certain design choices. German engineers had compensated for material shortages by developing innovative cooling techniques and by using manufacturing methods that were fast and repeatable, even if they reduced engine lifespan. For American engineers, this was invaluable. They gained insight into what was possible with limited resources and what compromises could be made without sacrificing overall performance. The Jumo 004 was not a perfect engine, but it was an engine that flew, fought, and shaped the future. Documents revealed the internal struggles of the German jet program as clearly as they revealed its achievements. Notes discussed blade failures at high temperatures, compressor stalls, and fuel shortages that restricted test flights. Correspondence showed arguments over design philosophy, production urgency, and the impossible demands placed on engineers as the war turned against Germany. These materials allowed the Allies to understand not just the engineering, but the scientific culture that had produced it. The intelligence value extended beyond aviation. The same materials and personnel captured during the operation fed into the broader scientific exploitation programs that would ultimately influence missile technology, metal research, aerodynamics, and early cooling systems for high-performance engines. The operation had not simply seized machines, it had captured ideas. But as these discoveries unfolded, another reality became clear. The race for German technology was only beginning. Across the front, Soviet units were seizing their own share of documents, prototypes, and personnel. The world that would emerge from the war would not be shaped solely by victory on the battlefield, but by the knowledge carried out of places like Dessau, Augsburg, and Nordhausen. And that made the next phase of the aftermath even more significant. In the weeks following the mission, the captured German engineers were transported to secure interrogation centers, where American specialists questioned them not as prisoners, but as sources of knowledge. Many cooperated readily, aware that the Reich they had served no longer existed in any functional sense. Their explanations clarified gaps in the documents, confirming test procedures, material specifications, and the reasons behind design revisions made during the frantic years of 1943 and 1944. These interviews helped decode the technical shorthand in the blueprints and transformed thousands of pages of notes into a coherent understanding of the German jet engine program. Meanwhile, Allied intelligence carefully compared their findings with what the Soviet Union had obtained. Reports filtered in describing entire factories captured intact by Red Army units, along with technicians who had fled east. The technological partition of post-war Germany had begun, and the Americans understood that what they carried westward would shape not only aviation, but the balance of power in the decades to come. The mission's success ensured the United States entered that new era with a significant advantage. As the war ended, the seized jet engines were shipped to research facilities across the United States, where test stands were constructed specifically to study them. Engineers dismantled the engines piece by piece, measured tolerances with precision instruments, and recreated the operating conditions under which they had flown in combat. The results illuminated strengths and weaknesses alike. The alloys used in turbine blades revealed both ingenuity and desperation. The fuel control systems showed remarkable responsiveness, but lacked long-term reliability. The axial compressor, a pioneering step for Germany, demonstrated both efficiency and fragility. Every component offered lessons that shaped the earliest generations of American jet engines. The impact extended well beyond aircraft propulsion. The knowledge gained informed research into gas turbines, high-temperature materials, and energy systems that would influence civilian and military engineering for decades. As early Cold War tensions emerged, the insights drawn from these captured engines contributed to the development of fighter jets that would define American air power throughout the 1,950 seconds and 1,960 seconds. Yet perhaps the most profound result was not technological, but symbolic. In the ruins of a collapsing regime, the United States had found the means to accelerate its entry into the jet age, not through espionage alone, but through the systematic effort to understand an adversary's scientific foundation. The mission illustrated how intelligence, engineering, and military operations could merge into a single strategic advantage. All of which leads naturally to the larger question, what this operation meant for the future of warfare and how the world changed because of it. In the quiet aftermath of victory, long after the gunfire had faded and the last convoys had rolled westward from Dessau, the meaning of the mission settled into clearer focus. The operation had unfolded at the crossroads of war and science, emerging not only as a triumph of intelligence work, but as a glimpse into the future that lay just beyond the conflict's end. What the Americans carried out of Germany were not trophies of conquest. They were blueprints for the world that was coming. Those jet engines, those stacks of drawings, those crates of turbine blades and alloy samples, all were fragments of an unfinished revolution. Germany had taken the first steps into an era of propulsion that no nation could ignore. In recovering the technical heart of the Jumo 004 program, the United States did more than deny the Soviets an advantage. It ensured that it would walk into the jet age with knowledge born from both triumph and failure. The lessons were as much about limitations as they were about innovation. Looking back, the mission revealed something deeper about the nature of modern conflict. Victory would no longer depend solely on armies maneuvering across battlefields. It would depend on the ability to understand, absorb, and surpass the scientific achievements of an adversary. The war had shown that engineering was strategy, that research was weaponry, and that intelligence was the bridge between them. For the men who searched those burned-out factories, that understanding came quietly. They collected fragments scattered across a defeated nation, yet those fragments formed a picture larger than any one engine or blueprint. They saw how desperation could spark creativity, how scarcity could force innovation, how a collapsing regime could still produce technology capable of reshaping the world. The mission underscored that even in the final hours of war, knowledge remained a prize of immeasurable value. It also marked the beginning of a new kind of rivalry. As Cold War tensions emerged, both superpowers raced to unlock the scientific potential captured in 1945. The discoveries taken from Germany influenced aircraft that broke the sound barrier, reconnaissance planes that touched the edge of space, and fighters that defined air combat for generations. The mission's legacy spread far beyond the men who carried those crates out of Dessau. It reverberated through laboratories, airfields, and geopolitical strategies for decades. And so, the operation stands as a reminder of a pivotal truth. Wars may be won on battlefields, but the future is shaped in workshops, laboratories, and the quiet rooms where intelligence teams sift through fragments of an enemy's ambition. In the closing days of World War II, American commandos did more than secure machinery. They captured a vision of what war and peace would become. Their work marked the end of one era and the unmistakable beginning of another.